to another installment of the Hoops Boys podcast. The co-host with most hosts, James the Jet. I, of course, am America's favorite bitch-ass white boy, CProc. Our guest analysts, Greggers in the Shaddillac, and we are taking it back to the lower amateur brackets necessarily of the basketball world, and that is the NCAA. Let's get right into it. Shad, of course, will attempt to tell him why he's wrong, but Greg, if this is your time to shine, good sir. Let's set up the top 25. Who are the top schools in the nation this year? We got a little bit mid-major and a little bit chalk right at the top. Houston number 1, Kansas number 2. What is the college landscape looking like this year?
If you gave me a snapshot right now so if you compared it to the NBA, the NCAA landscape right now would be the Western Conference. I think you have a lot of very solid squads. No clear-cut favorite at all. I do not see a Kentucky of the past, a Duke of the past. I don't think that there's no Zion team out there. There is some very good talent. I would say, again, a quick snapshot, you're looking at probably a dozen teams at this point you could make a legit case who could win it come March. But once again, no clear-cut favorite at all. That's first off the bat. So if your school is in contention, which many are, you have potential for a very, very entertaining season.
Are the schools at the top? Are they appropriately there?
Yeah, I think so. So Houston is number 1 right now. I do think that is a legit squad. Like Houston's a squad. If you watch a game they play, you get it in 2 seconds why they're so good. They are tenacious defensively. They're after every ball. They're in every lane. They're big. They have experience. So when you look at Houston, I think that is a legit squad. That's no phony. They are a legit championship contender. You look at Purdue, who was number 1 prior to last week. I mean, start off the bat, you have a 7'4" center, Zach Edey, who's one of the player of the year potential. I don't see them as, let me put it this way, as complete a team as some of the others. But again, when you have a 7'4" monster in the middle, I mean, good luck with that. If they get any shooting and any support cast, which they do, and you have to obviously go back to Kansas, who's rounded into form lately. They're the defending champ. They're now sitting at 14-1. I wouldn't put them on last year's squad, but you're talking 2 borderline lottery picks. Grady Dick for Kansas, one of their freshmen, is legit. Jalen Wilson. They definitely have the look of a Final Four team again, but on the same token, getting back to where I went earlier with there's no open team. They needed a pretty good comeback at home yesterday against an Oklahoma squad. It was not terrible, but again, I think you very much have an open landscape for a dozen teams to win this thing, and maybe even more actually. And that's not saying it's a lack of quality. Just there's no overwhelming favorite right now, in my opinion. I'd put Houston at the top, but no overwhelming favorite.
Chad, you're giggling. Is he wrong? Is he spot on?
No, he's definitely spot on. There's definitely no clear-cut number 1 team this year. I think going into this year, everybody thought it probably be like North Carolina, just because they went to the national championship, had the lead, and they pretty much got most of their starters, most of their rotation back from the previous year. I just think what's hurt them this year and hurt a lot of the top top teams is, one, these coaches have top coaches, Coach K, Roy Williams, and all of them have left over the years, and they just slide in these assistants who you don't know who can coach, can get 8 points just because of out of bounds plays, with their cleverness of the X's and O's. Also, it just feels like a lot of these top recruits are not going to play college basketball. They're going overseas or they're playing in the G League. So that kind of helps. It kind of hurts. These top teams that are used to getting these top 5-star recruits at these bigger schools.
Speaking of big schools, I mean, just looking down the top 25, there's not a lot of, despite the fact that Houston's sitting at the top as, probably still technically a mid-major, there's not a lot of mid-major representation in the top 25. I mean, I don't know if we still consider Xavier to be a mid-major. I don't know if we really consider TCU since they're in the Big 12. You have to go all the way down to 22 to get to the College of Charleston to get some random school that you're like, do a double take on and think. So is this going to be one of those tournaments that is just going to be a lot of chalk? Despite the fact that it's wide open, is it just going to be wide open with a lot of chalk, not a lot of surprises?
Still too early. I mean, you're really just getting into the core conference play now. So I think that will change but it'll, because you'll see some of the teams that are ranked fall off the rankings. Once, because it's comprised of majority of big school teams, right? Well, they're going to lose to each other, some of them. So I think you'll see that regress back to kind of the normal. You see a few more mid majors come into the picture as time goes on.
I think it's going to be a lot of upsets this year in the tournament. I know it's like that every year, but as we were saying, there is no clear, great team. So I wouldn't be surprised if you have, a school from like the A10, the AAC, besides, Houston, that makes it to like the Elite Eight, Final Four, almost like a St. Peter's of this year, except you'll maybe have 2 or 3 of them, just because there is no big disparity in talent and coaching like there was in the past, where everybody's going to the same few schools. And now it seems the talent has spread out. The transfer portal has kind of, been a big thing that levels out the competition also, because kids will up and leave, in a heartbeat if they're not getting playing time. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see, Charleston or, like somebody like the Citadel, or I don't know, just picking random teams. They end up, in these Sweet 16s, Elite Eights.
What's something? Here's something I would keep an eye on, because I think you're starting to see a little of this. Just me personally, quick glance down the rankings. A lot of these best teams, and something Shad you're talking about earlier. The landscape has obviously changed a lot over the last 10 years. Most kids, the best players are one and done. Whereas, you look at some programs like Kentucky, you can actually start to make an argument that started to hurt them. And even Duke, who's been more successful, a lot of they in past years, like they're losing their kids every year. I think this year, you look at some of the teams in the top 10, Houston's best player at this level, Marcus Sasser's a senior. You're looking at Zach Edey, Purdue's big man. I believe he's a junior now. UCLA has Jaquez, who's a senior. UConn, Sonogo, a junior. I think that is going to be a big factor come tournament time. I think these teams, even Gonzaga, who's not as good this year, you still have Drew Timme as their best player. He's a senior. I think as you get into the tournament, as we've seen here, that experience is probably going to pay off. So if you gave me something you wanted to bet on going forward, it's that some of these teams that are led by upperclassmen, I would forecast way ahead of time. I would project them to do well in the tournament. So I think you're seeing that. I think it's played out. Even the St. Peter's run, a bunch of kids who had played together a lot. I think that's becoming more of a factor now. Yes, the one and dones are super talented, but how much time do they have as a team to gel together? The season consists of 20 to 30 games, and then it's tourney time. One bad one, you're out. So I would, as of now, like I said, a quick glimpse. I would expect some of these teams like UCLA that are upperclassmen, some of their best players, to do well.
Partner, what we talking next?
So I wanted to know, what are you guys' sleeper schools or dark horses? Partner, you wanna go first?
I'll defer to the analysts. I don't
Alright,
want to make
cool.
myself sound like too much of a dummy.
For a dark horse. I'm not saying a Final Four team. I just reached the effect. I saw them last night. The Big East, let me take a couple schools out of there that you have. I'll actually use three of the schools: Marquette, Xavier, and Providence out of the Big East. None of those three schools were projected to, they had lost some of their best players. They've all looked very good. They're all now into the top 25. So I think whereas you looked at the Big East, and myself included, whereas Villanova's have been a big disappointment, UConn is expected to be a heavyweight. I think those schools out of the Big East, and it's not just their recent effect, like these teams can play. Marquette can score the basketball. Providence, ferocious defensively. And listen, Sean Miller, to much chagrin amongst many, weren't happy he came back, but he's made a difference there. So I would say the lower teams in the Big East, or the lower ranked teams in the Big East. TCU, I see. TCU looks pretty legit. They just had a narrow loss last night to Texas. That's a school with, again, Jamie Dixon coaching there. I would put them. And don't forget, if you remember the tournament last year, TCU got the benefit of the whistle against Arizona in that second round. Remember, Zona was the 1 seed, huge favorite. TCU is a school to me right off the bat that they have a big who's a huge factor. I would say right now they'd be someone I would look out for. They're ranked 17th. They can cause some teams some problems. And one more that I can't dismiss, because they're really in the same point as last year. It's going to sound odd because I don't want to call them a sleeper, but Carolina is not ranked. They've had a really bad start. They're not done yet. They literally were almost in the same spot last year. Depth is an issue, but I think they will figure it out. And I think come tourney time, if they come into the tourney as a 7-8 seed, which right now you're probably looking at that, or maybe lower, that would be a team you obviously don't want to face in that spot.
Shad. Who's your dark horse?
If I had to pick one team, I don't, kind of like what Greg says, I'm not sure if you consider them a dark horse, but I feel this team is always in it and just can never get their act together to win a championship is Gonzaga.
Yeah.
They have, great coaching with Mark Few. They have Drew Timme, seems like he's been there, a very long time. And they always just seem to have, the good chemistry. And it seems like they've been knocking on the door for, I don't know, the past at least 3 or 4 years where they're getting, these deep tournament runs. Maybe right now, since Drew Timme's been there through all that, they finally have the experience and the guy, they know that they can rely on, when times get tough, and your potential, Naismith Player of the Year candidate, for the 3rd, 4th year in a row. So if I had to pick one, dark horse that nobody's been talking about at the top of, the teams this year that could potentially, win the championship, it's got to be them.
I will throw one in actually, because, and I don't know if it feels unfair to say dark horse because they're number 4, but they're certainly not they're certainly not a school you traditionally think of when you think of elite basketball programs, and that's Alabama. But I've caught them a couple of times recently, and they all look half bad. They're big. They can shoot a little bit like that. They look like a pretty impressive tournament type of squad.
That's a legit squad. There's no doubt about it. They are a legit squad. You are not wrong there. No, not wrong. I just look quick. Another 2 squads. They're just, well, I wouldn't put Rutgers. Rutgers has pulled off some huge road wins, hit a couple last minute shots, but that's usually a good. They're not ranked right now, but I'm guessing that's a team that will make the tourney, and that's usually a good indicator of like how a team will fare, come tournament time. Some of these teams are great at home; they don't win elsewhere, and just that I don't think going to win it. But the Pitt Panthers with Jeff Capel, they've actually been surprisingly very good at this point. I mean, they have been completely irrelevant the last 5 years. The eyeball test and their games, they look like that's a team who may crack the tourney this year. So I don't know about national contender status, but you're seeing teams that you haven't seen in the mix in a while that are playing well, that could make for an interesting season.
Now, gang, I just want to talk about the Blue Devils post Coach K. How do we feel? Are we surprised, disappointed, or is this current run as expected?
It's definitely as expected.
Right out the gate.
Yeah, it's definitely as expected. You, like I said, you're hiring these assistant coaches who I don't think they've ever really coached a real team a day in their life, and you're just going to hand them, one of the best programs on earth and expect it not to, be any kind of skip and beat. Also, Duke, they just don't have the players this year. I believe like their leading scorer is only averaging like 12 points a game, and they have 2 players that are averaging double figures. So maybe this new coach, he can't recruit, or maybe just the luster is off of Duke. But Duke, I just feel like they're going to come down to earth. They're not going to be a top 5 program in the foreseeable future for the next couple of years until either this coach gets his act together or they fire him and finally, get one of these up and coming coaches to kind of save the program, which was be the smart move in the first place.
I think it's a bit of a mixed bag with Duke. Coach K aside, which obviously is a factor. I mean, they still had, which he had recruited the majority of. They had the number 1 recruiting class this year. Some of their best kids had not played early in the year. Like Derek Whitehead had been out. They've been good at home, not great on the road. They barely beat BC the other day, who's pretty awful. I think they're more of they have talent. That's not a question, but just as I alluded to earlier, they're still for the most part, besides Roach, the point guard, they're every kid they're playing in the rotation, minus 1 or 2 is they're freshmen. So no matter how talented these kids are, and two of the McDonald's All-American kids missed time to start the year, do they put this together by the end of the season? I think they're good. They're a tourney team, but I think kind of this is what they really are. I mean, I think they're, in the probably 15 to 20 range. Upside talent-wise is there, but I haven't seen anything as a team that they don't differentiate themselves, put it that way, to this point. I think they'll win their fair share of games at home, and as they've done already, they'll struggle on the road. Probably enter the tourney in the, if I had to guess, the 5 range, 5-6 range. But physical talent is there. I don't see this as a Duke team that is, some sleeper to make the Final Four either. I don't see that. Physical talent is there, but it takes more than that, as we've learned.
That was so tame. I was hoping we were going to get you fired up and hot under the collar.
Well, I'm kind of in a happy place because I just know they're not really good. And I'm like, that makes me, yeah, they're not horrible. They're not. But I don't have to watch the 18 hours a day retirement tour this year. And, so the craze and the nonsense has settled down. It's like, it's just like another good basketball team. That's what they are. Take aside the bluster. That's actually a good way to put it. They're a good basketball team. They're not great. They have big time talent, but they're a good team. I don't see them winning this title at all. That doesn't mean I think they're, an absolutely wretched squad who's going to tank. No, but there's nothing I've seen at this point that makes me think this is a title contender. I do not.
Well, let's go on to something that maybe will get you fired up. Let's talk about something near and dear to your heart. The Huskies seem to have gone back to former levels of prominence in the early going. Are they really back? Are they a little bit of fool's gold? What's the status on the Huskies now as they
No,
sit in the top 10 position?
I think it's legit. If you saw it more so in the before the conference schedule, just brought in Alabama. They won one of the Phil Knight Invitational tournaments out in Oregon. They beat Bama, they beat Iowa State, they whooped on Oregon. They won substantial games. Florida's not great, but they whacked them at Florida. So they've beaten some big conference teams on the road, neutral court. They're legit. I mean, they're deeper than they've been at years. We talked off air. Donovan Clingan he's coming off the bench. He's a 7'2" center. The kid's a monster. I mean, he's an absolute beast. He's polished for a big kid. He doesn't take the ball down on a rebound. He doesn't overly. A lot of young bigs get in foul trouble easy. He stays on his feet most times, blocks shots. And again, that's just a kid off the bench, and that goes to what I'm saying about them. They play 8 or 9 deep. You probably have 3 or 4 pros. Sanogo was the Big East Player of the Year. He's an absolute brute down below. So they've lost a few games in conference the past few weeks, but honestly, it's one of those deals. Not that you want them to lose any team, but you don't want a team going into the tourney 28-0 either. They have some things to clean up. The turnovers have been crept up a little lately against some Big East teams on the road, to be expected. But I do think they are one of the 10 teams, no doubt about it, that have a legit chance to win the tournament. There's no doubt. And as I said, you have a 7'2" center who's, he actually won. Speaking of, he won the player of the tournament in Oregon, and he was coming off the bench. So that just goes to show you. In past years, the Huskies, if one of their main guys, didn't shoot well, didn't score, they have shooting, they have bench depth. So they're up there. And their best player, arguably Sanogo, is he's now a junior, and yeah, they're in the mix. It's been a nice turnaround.
Shad, you were actually high on them going into the tournament last year, which is probably the first time in our entire lives, I think, that you were ever high on UConn. Do you agree with Greg? Do you think the Huskies are back to prominence, or are you going to go back to your comfort zone of trashing UConn?
No, I still hate UConn, just being a big Syracuse fan, but I think they surprised the hell out of me this year. I thought they would be good. I didn't think they would be in the top 3 ranking at all. But they seem like they have the right coach in there since Ali left. They seem to be getting. I'm not sure if they're getting like the top tier recruits, but they seem to be developing players that are fitting their system, and they're having great team chemistry. And I think just being back in the Big East has, just helped with the school spirits that got the school back into, the men's basketball team has also helped also. I don't think, they didn't feel right being in the American Athletic Conference. That just seemed like a mid-major conference to me. That maybe be the reason why they weren't as good as they were in the previous years. Maybe people just didn't look at UConn as the same as they did back in the Calhoun days. But it's great to see, especially that player from Connecticut. Greg was touching on Klingman. Klingman, I think how you said his name is, the 7-footer. He looks like he could be a legit pro, like somebody not this year, but next year, who could be like a lottery pick, in the draft, just because he's 7 feet, he can move. He plays kind of old school in a way, kind of big, but he doesn't seem like he's a stiff. He could have a good, pretty long NBA career, I think, in my opinion. But it's just good to see UConn, back at the top. Now it seems like it's they're rivaling the good teams again, which is interesting and great for Northeast hoops.
Quickly on what Shad says, well, I definitely think that is a factor going back to the Big East. It feels like it's brought a juice back to the program. It really has, every which way. And the one last thing about them too is Jordan Hawkins, their sophomore guard. For me, for my money's worth, he's the one who can come tourney time. Do they make the Final Four? Do they go out a little earlier? He for me is the X factor because he can be the best player on that team. As of now, as of if today, he would be the highest player drafted on that team. He's the one that could potentially take over a game. He can shoot the lights out at times. So I think Hawkins, not to put it all on his shoulders because they're plenty deep, but I think, when you get deep into the tourney, which I would assume they'd make that run this year, I think you're going to need someone like him to be a superstar come tourney time, and I think he has that potential.
Well, speaking of tourney time, Lord knows I won't ask you to pick the final four right now, but who do you think is in line right now to get the 4 number 1 seeds?
I will. Me, I would say UConn, Purdue, Kansas. Boy, I don't know, who would you put in after that?
Citadel.
Yeah.
Citadel. Definitely Citadel.
Do you think Houston's just gonna fall off?
Me?
Yeah,
I thought I said Houston. I didn't.
I didn't think so.
Okay.
I think Houston's the surest fire bet 4-1. Pure sense. I mean, they're number 1 now. The Americans not that strong comparatively. I can't see them losing more than 3-4 games at most. So I think from a scheduling perspective, and they're legit, they're worthy of it. So it's not like if Houston gets a 1 seed, that's like, oh, they played a weak schedule. Houston does have that talent level. So I think Houston's the safest bet because of that, because they're not going to face much of a gauntlet the rest of the way. They're not. As a matter of fact, I don't think there's a single American team ranked right now besides them. I don't believe so.
All right, so I definitely put Houston in there. So my 4 would be Houston, Kansas, UConn, Purdue.
I'm gonna go Houston. I will go Kansas. I mean, Kansas has talent again. They're off to a great start. They appear to be the best of that conference. I'm going to put UCLA in. I mean, I'm taking a West Coast team number 1, but I think UCLA is a legit factor, period. Anyway, they had a win in Maryland before the holidays. I mean, they legit were up. It was something like 70-30. Not that Maryland's, some, national title contender, but to win any road game on that against a legit team, and they're upperclassmen. So I'm going to put UCLA in there as a 3rd. I don't think UConn will get the 1. Reason being, again, the Big East to me looks a little stronger than what I thought it was going to be. It doesn't mean I don't think UConn can make the Final Four. I definitely do think they can. If I had to take another 1 seed, though, I think I'd go back to Purdue as well. So I'd go Houston, Kansas, Purdue, and I'd go down to UCLA out west. That's where I'd go. Doesn't mean I think they're going to be the top 4 teams, but just how I think the season may play out. That's how I would structure it.
Write it in the books. We'll table it in, I don't know, a few weeks' time, I guess.
So gang, thanks to our guest experts for giving us their regional picks. We would love to hear you guys, the audience, regional picks. So hit us up on socials at Hoops Boys Pod on both Instagram and Twitter. Keep a lock on our YouTube page to see any upcoming videos. And shout out to Greg and Chad once again for all their expertise. And until next time, Hoops Boys Pod. Peace.
Kobe. You didn't play college.